History remembers him as a lion, a king of courage, a symbol of chivalry. Richard I of England, Richard the Lionheart, the man who led armies across continents, who clashed with Saladin in legendary battles, who came closer than any Crusader king to reclaiming Jerusalem, but never quite reached it. But that's not where the story ends. Because when Richard returned home in 1192, he left something behind. Something that still lingers in the deserts, the ruins, and the memory of those forgotten by history. What Richard left in the Holy Land was not just a legacy. It was a curse. Let's go back. Not to the great battles you already know, but to the places history chose to forget. Acre, Jaffa, Arsuf, small places where big secrets sank into the sand. In 1191, after brutal campaigning, Richard successfully captured Acre. But what followed was not victory, it was a massacre. Over 2,700 Muslim prisoners, mostly women, children, and soldiers who had surrendered under terms, were executed in cold blood. Richard gave the order. Why? Chroniclers argue it was strategic, pressure on Saladin, leverage in negotiation. But the truth is murkier. Some records mention whispers among the knights and fear of something spreading in the camp. Was it a disease, a curse, or something far older? One Templar account, censored in later copies, speaks of a man among the prisoners who spoke in the tongue of devils, warning Richard that the gate he opens will not close. Of course, this was dismissed as superstition. But the massacre at Acre wasn't just brutal, it was ritualistic. The bodies were buried in a massive trench near the coastline, hastily and without rites. Some say a strange symbol was found etched into the sand after the execution. No one dared replicate it. The next few months were filled with victories, but also shadows. Richard advanced along the coast toward Jaffa, clashing with Saladin's forces. Yet something changed in him. Accounts from his own men mention fits of rage, erratic behavior, and an obsession with a single relic, the so-called Sword of the Cross. This sword, said to have been found buried beneath a ruined chapel in Arsuf, was unlike any other. Forged with strange inscriptions not in Latin, not Arabic, but something unidentifiable. Richard believed it was a sign, a holy weapon destined to bring him to Jerusalem. But none of his victories brought him closer. Saladin, wise and elusive, avoided direct defeat. The road to Jerusalem was open at one point, but Richard hesitated. He turned back. Historians chalk it up to strategic decision-making. But his letters from that period tell a different story. In one, written to his sister Joanna, he says, "There are places where God does not dwell, and I fear I have come too close to one." What did he mean? There are rumors that during his time in the Holy Land, Richard and a small group of trusted men entered the ruins of an ancient temple outside of Ascalon. Not one built by Crusaders or Muslims or even Romans, but something older. A letter, hidden for centuries in the archives of the Abbey of Clairvaux and uncovered only recently, refers to a cave of the Seven Eyes, a place where kings are shown the price of power. It was signed simply with an R. After visiting this location, Richard reportedly fell ill. Not from plague, not from wounds, but from something inexplicable. His physicians were baffled. He began muttering in languages he never learned. He demanded the Sword of the Cross be sealed in a reliquary and never touched again. Then, just as suddenly, he recovered. He left the Holy Land within the year. But the region didn't forget him. In the decades that followed, strange events were reported in areas where Richard had fought. Entire villages abandoned overnight. Crusader outposts falling without a battle. Pilgrims disappearing along routes once patrolled by his knights. One French chronicler visiting the remains of the camp at Jaffa wrote that local shepherds refused to go near the ruins after dark. They spoke of voices, chants, and the smell of iron and incense drifting through the wind. What did Richard leave behind? Not a kingdom, not a peace treaty, not even a lasting Christian presence. What he left was a fracture, a ripple in something deeper. When the Crusaders finally lost the Holy Land for good, when the last strongholds fell to Muslim hands, there was a sense of closure. But not in the places Richard touched. The ground there feels unsettled, as if something buried is still waiting. Perhaps it's all legend. Perhaps the stories are just that. Stories. But some symbols found in old Templar strongholds resemble the one reportedly seen after the massacre at Acre. A twisting sigil, half sun, half serpent. This meaning is still unknown. Richard the Lionheart died years later, in France, struck by a crossbow bolt during a petty siege. He was buried, divided, his heart in Rouen, his body in Fontevraud Abbey, and according to some rumors, his sword in an undisclosed location beneath Montségur, guarded by a silent order. But part of Richard never returned. His war in the Holy Land was not just against Saladin. It was against something else. Something he found, or perhaps something that found him. He left behind fire, death, and a silence no history book can explain. A silence that hangs over Acre and Ascalon, over Jaffa and Arsuf. A silence that even the wind respects. And maybe, just maybe, that silence is waiting to speak again. Because history remembers what we build. But dark history remembers what we bury.